All right. Today, as promised, we're going to be repotting. We're going to be repotting this Chinese elm here. I was planning initially on an ash tree, but when I was out in my backyard the other day, I noticed that this Chinese elm is covered in tiny little green buds. It's starting to burst. So my window of opportunity is closing on this one. So I thought we'd look at this Chinese elm. We're going to be putting it into a new pot. I'm going to get you guys to help me choose a pot, and we're going to go through the fundamentals of repotting. Repotting is one of the most important things that we do in bonsai to keep our trees healthy. It's really important to know how to repot. And if you do it properly, if you get the timing right, you get your soil mixture right, and you get the technique right, you will be rewarded with healthy trees that will last for, will outlive you anyway. So that's the idea. So it's a really important thing to do and to get and to understand. Also, if you're a beginner, it's one of the slightly scarier things to do. Most people, when they repot, are a little bit too tentative when it comes to removing the soil and combing out the roots and pruning the roots back. That's what I found. Most people are, whenever people watch me repot, they always say, "Oh, you're going much harder than I do." I do that all the time. So we're starting off with a species, with this repotting, we're starting off with a species that is quite easy to do. Deciduous trees, I find probably the easiest trees to repot, because you can go really hard and they won't care if you do it at the right time of year. So the timing for a deciduous tree is when they're dormant, which is obviously now, although I've got a couple of deciduous trees. Like I've got a jacaranda that still hasn't got the leaves yet, so I'm letting that one go. But they drop their leaves, they go into winter dormancy, and then late winter, early spring, depending on the species, depending on the conditions in your backyard, they start to sprout. Just when they're starting to sprout is a good time. It means that the roots usually start growing a little bit before the shoots do. So that means in this tree that the roots are starting to grow a little bit now, which means that if I prune it now, if I prune the roots back now, they'll recover quickly. This is a little bit earlier than I would expect. Usually my ash trees are the first ones, but it's a Chinese elm, they're pretty tough. If you think about deciduous trees, if you go to Bunnings and you buy your stone fruits and your roses, all those deciduous plants and trees, you know that they can be bare rooted. Like you go and buy your roses, they're just in sawdust. Like they've been pulled out of the ground, they've been chopped back, and put into sawdust. A few weeks ago, I bought a little dwarf almond tree for the front yard, and once again, it had just been pulled out of the ground. The roots have been cut off and been packed in sawdust and plastic bags. So deciduous trees can be bare rooted. And when I say bare rooted, I mean you can wash away all of the soil, like all of the soil, remove all of it, and put fresh soil back, and they'll be fine. So if you're a little bit nervous about root pruning, just remember, if it's a deciduous tree, it'll be fine. If you do it at the right time of year, which is from now onwards, yeah. If your tree isn't budding yet, if it's still sitting there, I would wait. It's actually, it's mid-July, it's a bit early. But start thinking about your ash trees. My ash trees always are usually the first to bud. So late July, in my backyard anyway, is a good time. And if you get some repotting done early, if you have a lot of trees, it's good. Sometimes you get a bit overwhelmed with the repotting. So it's good to space them out a bit, and anything that can be done early, do early. Trees that I wouldn't be doing now, things like a lot of the evergreens. So junipers and pines, it's too early. Olives, too early, I'll be waiting. Definitely figs and heat-loving trees like figs and jade trees, I don't do them until summer. Everything else is around now. Late winter, early spring. Some species you can do in autumn as well, but that's a subject for another day. But now is a good time to be doing it. What else? So why do we repot? That's probably a good question. Some really important reasons why we repot. Firstly, is the reason that we prune the roots is to stop the tree from getting pot bound or root bound. If you've ever pulled a plant out of a pot and you get the roots and you see the roots going round and round and round the bottom of the pot because they've got nowhere to go, that's root bound or pot bound. And so what's happened is that the tree has run out of room in the pot and it's just circling around itself. Those roots that get produced are very inefficient, and a couple of things: it won't drain properly. The roots will slow right down because there's nowhere to go. And the roots that do produce don't pull up as much water and as much nutrients because they're just less efficient. So what we have to do is we have to pull the tree out, and occasionally, roughly every 3 years, depending on the species, you pull it out, you trim the roots, you put fresh soil, you put the tree back in, the roots have got room to grow, and the tree will be healthier, it won't be pot bound, the soil will drain away better. Also, after years and years, the soil mass can get quite compacted, especially directly under the trunk here, directly under the trunk. Not much water gets in there, it can dry out and get compacted, and you end up with this hard lump underneath. And that's just wasting space. You haven't got a lot of space in here, you need to take advantage of as much space as you can. And that hard ball is just completely useless. So if you get to that stage, you need to remove that old compacted soil and replace it with fresh. If it's a tree that you've dug up from the wild or from the garden, not an olive, because with an olive, when we dig them up, we tend to cut all the roots off and just plant them. But if you dug up an ash tree or something, you probably still have a bit of that original soil left. So once a tree that you've dug up in the wild has been settled for a year or two, if it's a deciduous tree, it's a really good idea to bare root and get rid of all of that soil, that original soil, and replace it with good bonsai potting mix. So we improve the aeration, we give the tree room to grow. The other side benefit is that by reducing the root mass for a little while, there's less nutrients and less water coming up into the tree, so the tree will respond with small leaves, which is what we want. We want to get the leaves smaller, reduce the size of the leaves. A lot of trees respond by root pruning with extra vigour, things like pine trees, like this. If I was to prune it back hard and to do the roots as well, it'd probably come back with a fairly strong flush of growth, which is one reason we don't do it every year. But if you're in the early stages of a tree, just developing the trunk and the branches, and you're trying to thicken them up, you can actually do it every year, and the tree will respond with stronger growth. I've got willow trees that I do every year because they produce so many roots, it gets popped down really quickly. Pine trees and junipers, usually for me every 3 or 4 years. Usually you can tell if a tree needs to be repotted. Firstly, when you water it, it doesn't drain away as quickly. When you water, you want the water to drain away quickly. You don't want it pooling on the surface here for very long. If it sits there for more than 30 seconds or a minute, it means that the soil is getting a bit too compact or it's full of roots and the water's not draining away properly. If I can get a chopstick, if I can push it in easily, you probably don't need to repot. There's plenty of room. This is getting pretty tough. Yeah, it's getting pretty tough. I could probably get away with another year, but I want to put this into a new pot. So that's what I'm doing this year. So that's the first sign. A tree that is root bound will lose vigour. So you'll notice your tree, for some reason, it's just not looking as healthy. The leaves won't be a nice, vibrant colour. The growth will be really slow or stunted, and it's just not looking as good. That's a good sign that it needs repotting. If it gets really extreme, those roots which go around the bottom will keep growing and they'll actually push the soil layer, and you'll see that the soil layer actually will start rising above the rim of the pot. That's a really good sign that you need to repot. Okay, so that's why we repot, and that's what we're going to do with this one. So, first things first, let's just move this back a little bit. So what I do is, usually we take the tree out and we put it back in the same pot. And that's another reason we root prune, is so that we can keep the tree in the same pot. If we didn't root prune, we have to put it into a bigger and a bigger and a bigger pot. And before you know, you've got something too big to carry. And we want to keep the trees in the same pot, or the same size pot for the lifetime of the tree. So by doing this, we can keep putting the tree back in the same pot year after year after year. So what I've got is this tree. So like I said, it's a Chinese elm. It's looking quite nice. I really like this tree. I'd like a little bit more ramification, but as you can see, it's looking quite mature now. So I'm going to, so this tree needs the best soil I can give it, and the best pot that I can give it. It needs, I think it deserves now a better pot. What I'm trying to say is, if I've got a tree that's in the very, very early stages and it's not going to be shown or exhibited for many, many years, I don't have to be as fussy about the soil mixture and the pot that I put it in, because I'm not showing it to anyone. It doesn't matter too much. But this tree is at a stage now where I want it to look better. So I've got it. We could spend all day talking about pot selection. I chose this one because at the time the tree was losing a bit of vigor in the shallow pot that it was in. So, and I also changed the style quite significantly. I put it into a slightly larger pot than it needed, just to get some more root growth and get a bit more vigor back into it. And that worked a treat. It's worked really well. But I want it into a smaller pot now. For me, a deciduous tree looks best in a glazed pot. That's just my preference, and in Japan, I think that's the more traditional. You leave the unglazed pots for your junipers, your conifers, and you get a glazed pot for your deciduous trees. Luke and I are always laughing that in Japan, the deciduous trees are always in blue pots, blue glazed pots. That allows just what they tend to go for. So I've chosen a couple of glazed pots that I had lying around. If I got a bit caught unawares with this tree, like I said, it's budding a little bit before I was ready. So I would have liked to have got out and perhaps spent a bit more time choosing a better pot, but I've got a couple here which I think will look good. Ideally, I want something a bit smaller, a bit narrower, and a little bit shallower. So I've got a blue glazed pot. This one here, you probably can't see the colours very well. It's blue. It's got a nice like little green stripes going through it. It's quite nice. I used to have a hawthorn tree in there. This one might be a good candidate. I quite like that. Rule of thumb, and this is only a rule of thumb, but the width of the pot is roughly 2/3 the height. So that's roughly 2/3. 1/3, 2/3. Roughly. It's a little bit shallow. It's probably not quite wide enough. Then I've got this one here, which is kind of similar in the colour, but it's shallower. And it's got these quite nice little scallops. It's a feminine looking pot, which I think suits this tree, because this tree to me is fairly feminine. So I'm thinking that one there would look better. In fact, looking at these pictures, I'm definitely now leaning towards that creamer pot. That one's a bit deeper. Feel free to jump in and tell me which pot you think is better.
That one.
This one?
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
I agree. Green one.
Green one? I'm happy to hear someone saying that for the blue one.
I like the white one, but a bit deeper.
I like the blue one. I like the blue one. But
I'm not sure. What we'll do is we'll get both pots ready, and we'll actually, when we pull this out, we'll put it into both ones, and that might change your mind. Okay, so I need to get the pots ready. Also, I just want to show you how the little buds look. I'm going to bring this in really close. I'm hoping you'll be able to see this. But if you look here, can you see the little green buds everywhere?
Yeah, yeah.
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 Yeah, it's been an
I've
odd
got a not mandarin, nectarine tree in the backyard, and I noticed yesterday I've got flowers on it already.
Oh gosh. Okay.
And I haven't even pruned it yet.
Yeah.
Problem.
I've got an ash in a bonsai pot out in the back corner. Lost all its leaves 6 weeks ago, and I've got a second flush of leaves on it, and it's almost all covered.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
And it was one of those I was planning on repotting, so I'm going to have to wait now.
Okay, so first thing I'm going to do with my pots, if you've never repotted first thing you need to do is that bonsai pots always have big drainage holes. And this drainage is really, really, really important. So the first thing I do is that I cover the drainage holes with some mesh. You can buy Japanese bonsai pot mesh from around the place. I think Luke sells it actually. Or you can go to Bunnings and buy some gutter guard and cut it up into squares, which is what I've done. That's just a bit of gutter guard. And then what I do is I get a little piece of wire and I fold it into this rather rough looking shape, like a little T-piece, okay? It doesn't have to look nice because no one's going to see it, okay? So something like that. So, and then what I do is I poke it through the holes like that. Poke the whole thing in, spin around, fold these down like that. Holds it in place. Okay.
Matt, you can also get a roll of tape, which is adhesive. It's used as the seaming point when you're gyprocking and you run the plaster over it. And you just cut off what you need and then stick it to the pot.
Okay. And so that's got drainage, has it?
So yes, it's a net pot, net strip, and you put it over a gyprock joint and then put your plaster over the top of it. So it holds the plaster that you see, but it's adhesive on it, so it sticks to the pot.
Okay.
Bunnings.
Yeah, jointing. It's gyprock jointing tape.
Okay. My concern is, can you take it off again?
Yes. It's not that adhesive. It's adhesive enough to stay there. Neil actually mentioned it on Oz Bonsai in a post once, I remember.
That's interesting. I haven't heard of that.
The other hint I've got, where you've wired that way round, I put my wires and clip them inside the pot, so if I pick the pot up, I don't stab my fingers with the wire that's underneath the pot.
Whatever works. Absolutely. Yeah, no, that sounds fine. Yeah, that sounds good.
And I'm lazy. I don't put any wire at all. I just put my finger there and pour some dirt on top of it, and that's enough to keep it in place.
Okay. Well, the reason we do it is obviously to stop the fine soil from draining away. There's also got the added advantage is that it stops the larger slaters from coming into your pot. These pots don't have particularly large drainage holes, but sometimes they're huge. You get ones like, great big drainage holes all the way around, and they definitely will need something to stop it from the soil from falling out. So that's the first step, get the drainage holes. Then what we need to do is we need to put some stringless and wire in the pot that's going to hold the tree down. This is important because once the tree is in the pot, we don't want it moving around. If it moves around, like the wind or whatever, if the tree keeps wobbling about, it'll break off the small roots that are growing and will set the tree back significantly. So we want the tree to sit in the pot really securely. Now, sometimes I use string, sometimes I use wire. I usually use string because the string just rots away after a while. By the time it rots away, the roots have all gotten settled, fill the pot, and it'll hold the tree in place. With this tree, because this is an advanced tree that I'm taking a bit more care with, I'm going to use wire. So the wire will stay in there and hold the tree in permanently. So I'm just using some thin aluminium wire, and I'm going to use 2 pieces. So modern pots tend to have wire holes, like tiny little holes. If you buy a pot off Luke, he puts little wire holes everywhere. That's really handy. Older pots don't tend to. So I just put it in one hole and out the other. And I'm going to do it both pots. I'm going to get both pots ready, just in case. Let's see which one I'm going to use. Okay, so once again, putting this in is really important. If you can hear children in the background, my daughter has got a friend over for a sleepover, so the house is full of giggling girls. So I'm seeking refuge in here at the moment.
Makes it sound like a happy place. It's good.
It is. It is. It's been good fun. Right, there's one pot. I'll just quickly do this one as well. And then we'll have a look at the soil that I put together. We'll talk about soil mixes. Feel free to ask any questions at any time. I read somewhere somebody likes to put the wire in and they like to secure the tree so thoroughly they think they've done a good job if they're able to pick the tree up and the pot comes with it. That's pretty extreme. And I've seen some people do really fancy things with their holding wire. They create a ring of thick wire which they place down and they hold the ring down with wire through the holes, and then they put finer wire through the ring so that the ring goes all the way under the tree. There's all sorts of fancy techniques, which I'm sure you can find online. All right, that's the 2 ready.
Matt?
Yeah.
So if you do that, like you said, where they do the ring and lots of wire and tie it down, can you have the problem where the roots actually grow over the wire, and so when you want to repot again, you then have to cut back really severely because you know how some branches can grow, can the wire sort of be covered by the roots? And
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The wire can get quite meshed in with the roots. I don't think it causes a real problem because the roots will just grow around it, but they can. It will get to a point where if you want to remove that wire, you're going to have to cut back the roots for it quite hard. With a deciduous tree, I don't see a problem because you do that occasionally anyway, like we're about to with this one. Maybe more probably if you've got to have an old pine tree, because with pine trees you don't want to remove too much of the roots all at once. That could possibly be problematic. So yes, that could be an issue. All right.
So that would be an advantage in using string, Matt.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you use string, it just rots.
Just rot.
If you use string, I've got this rather expensive cooking twine because it was the only thing that was in the supermarket when I went there. Usually I just use the cheap round string, like the cheaper the better, because it just rots after about a year or 2. This stuff I've actually noticed after about 3 or 4 years, it's still there. It's not a problem, you just pull it out, but it's still there. This stuff's actually quite tough. You just get the cheap stuff. All right, the next thing I'm going to do with these pots is I'm going to get them ready because once I pull the roots out, I want to get it settled in the pot fairly quickly. So I want to get a base layer of soil. So let's talk quickly about soils. If you ask 10 bonsai people about the soil mix, you'll get 12 answers. Everyone's got their own mixture of soil. I've done a beginner's class on soil mixes. I should probably do another one. I've done a little bit, but what you need with your bonsai soil mixes is it needs to be able to drain. It needs to be able to drain really freely. Don't use plain potting mix. It'll be good at first, but plain potting mix will break down after about 12 months or 2 years, and it'll set fairly hard. And all those particles will break down and down and down, they'll get quite really too fine, and the drainage will suffer. Never ever use soil out of your garden, regardless of how good it is. If you grow prized vegetables or roses, don't use garden soil. It's full of pathogens, which if a plant is in the soil, will be able to cope with, but in the confines of a pot, it will struggle. You've got a lot of pathogens in there. And once again, the drainage, even if you've got nice loamy soil, the drainage will break down and will suffer very quickly. So never ever use garden soil. The most basic mix, what I like to use is, you've got two components for your soil mixes. You've got organic and inorganic. So inorganic is the main part of your mixture. So that's your grit. So we use things like, which we can buy at bonsai shops, or Cobb & Co is a good one. Pumice is my current favourite. You get pumice in small pieces, about 3 mil. Diatomite, which is getting harder to find. Diatomite is a diatomaceous earth that's mined in Queensland. However, from what I've heard recently is that the mines there no longer fire it, so it's not as hard when it breaks down. So diatomite's getting kind of hard, but it's a good product. It's nice and porous. Zeolite, another mine product. You can get zeolite from various places, but the most common one at the moment is that Terry found that the Woolworths home brand kitty litter is pure zeolite. And Terry, you've been using that for a little while now, and it's been fine, hasn't it?
Yes, that goes into all my potting mix, and my plants don't care less.
Cool. So home brand Woolworths kitty litter, zeolite. Make sure it's the one with the zeolite.
It's an orange bag.
Yep, that's good stuff, and it's not expensive. That's a good one. What else could you use? Well, if you've got the money and you've got a prize treat, the akadama, which is the Japanese fired clay, which comes from Japan, obviously, and they sell it at Bonsai Mujo. It's really good. It's quite expensive, but that's a good one. So all of these inorganic mixtures, marble chips. We used to use a lot of marble chips, not so much these days. And then your organic, which is potting mix, like a premium potting mix is a good one. But the one I use now is the orchid mix, which is the tiny little pieces of bark with no fines in it, tiny little pieces of bark. And I really like that. You can buy that at Bunnings, you can buy it at Bonsai Mujo. They're good places. So rule of thumb, 2/3 inorganic, 1/3 organic. If you get really desperate, actually not if you get desperate, you can buy, I know that Barry sells a potting mix, which is fine. That's a 50-50 mix of good quality potting mix and marble chips. It's fine. I've used it occasionally. It's fine. It's not my favourite, but it'll be fine. Your trees will be fine in it. Bunnings sells a bonsai potting mix. I wouldn't buy that. It's got way too much sand in it. It's way too fine. However, if you get really caught out and you really need something, they have a cactus and succulent mix, which is better than their bonsai mix. You could use that if you wanted to. You don't have to go to the trouble of buying this stuff. The other thing you need to do is, with some of this pumice, is you need to sieve it out a little bit or wash it, because it's covered with dust. And I like to, I've got a set of sieves, and we use those plastic colanders and sieve out the fines. They often come in different grades and different sizes, just to make it more complex. So for this tree, it's not a big tree. I'm going to show you what it looks like. I mixed this all together last night. Hopefully you can see. So the white bits, that's pumice. In here is a little bit of akadama, because I found an old bag of akadama I didn't realise I had. So I chucked that in there. And then I've got, you can see these tiny little pieces. I'll put one right on the end there. Maybe not. Where are we? There we are. That's the orchid mix. It's just like tiny little pieces of bark like that. Okay, so it's roughly like I said, 2/3 organic, 1/3 inorganic. You can tweak it a bit. Pine trees, I have purely organic. I have no, sorry, purely inorganic for your pine trees. I have no organics in my pine trees whatsoever. I use this for most trees. With junipers and your conifers, I up the ante with the inorganic. So it'll be perhaps 3/4 inorganic, or like I said with pine trees, 100%. And I know a lot of bonsai growers have no organic at all. And your trees will be fine. Just remember, it drains really, really quickly. Your trees will be healthy, but you can keep the water up. I find that this mixture is a good compromise. There's a bit of organic in there that'll hold the moisture in the really hot weather.
Matt?
Yeah.
Can I ask what particle size roughly you have there for an established tree like that one?
About 2 to 3 mil. Roughly about 3 mil. However, having said that, I've also got some larger particles, which I'm going to use for a drainage layer. Now, I'm going to show you this. This is the, what is this? This is the pumice. You could either use pumice, or in this case, it's the diatomite. You can see these pieces are quite large. Okay. This was, I had a bag of this stuff with the larger particles. Or sometimes when you sift out your finers, your finer material, you get these larger ones left over. Or you can use gravel or something, but I'm going to put a drainage layer down. A lot of people don't bother with the drainage layer, and your trees will still live, they'll be fine. I like to put down a drainage layer. The idea, even in a shallow pot, I still like to have a drainage layer. The idea with the drainage layer is that it's not actually to help drainage, it's to get air into the very bottom of the pot. The most common problem with overwatering with trees, one of the reasons trees tend to die if they're overwatered or underwatered. If they're overwatered, what happens is that you get water sitting in the bottom of the pot that doesn't drain away. And especially when you first repot a tree, the roots haven't gotten there down the bottom of the pot, and they're not sucking up the water. So you have a danger of water pooling in the bottom, not budging and going off, going rancid, going sour. And your tree won't like that. You can get root rot, all sorts of problems. So putting in a drainage layer ensures that there's plenty of oxygen, plenty of air at the bottom of the pot. So, and I know, like I said, I've seen a lot of people do trials with and without drainage layers. I don't think it's a big issue to have it or not. I still like to do it. I know in Japan they still do drainage layers, even on the shogun pots, even on the tiny little ones, they still do the drainage layer. In fact, in Japan, sometimes if they're just using the pure akadama, they'll have the different grades getting finer. They'll have 3 grades. They'll put the big pieces on the bottom, medium in the middle, and fine on the top. I don't go to that length, but I still have the drainage layer. So, where's my scoop? I had a scoop in, I've lost it. There it is. So, I'm going to put this heavy stuff, like big stuff, down the bottom. All right. And I'll do it like
So while Matt's doing that, with the Woolworths zeolite, you'll find that you actually get a great range of different sizes. So by sifting out the really big bits, you could, I guess, also use that as your drainage layer and then use the smaller bits in your actual mix itself.
Exactly right, Terry. That's exactly what you do. I think it's worth, I don't want to swamp people with heaps of things that you have to buy when you first start bonsai. And I'm a great believer that when you start bonsai, you can get away with, like, you don't need expensive tools. You don't need a lot of fancy things. One thing that I think is useful, though, are the sieves. You can buy them at Bonsai Mujo. I should have looked them in. It's like a round dish with interchangeable bases of different size mesh. It's great. The other thing you can use are these plastic colanders. You can use this to sift out the really fine stuff as well. They're quite good. If you want, and these are like $1.50. So, but if you can, I quite like the Sims if you're going to be making up your own projects. All right, we need to get stuck into this tree. So we've got this, actually, no, I'm still not ready, because I've got to put a layer of soil as well. I'll get my base layer of soil, and I've lost my, here it is right in front of me. All right, so once again, I'm going to put a layer.
Mac, I discovered that there's a summary of your potting mixes in the newsletter Autumn 2018, and I've sworn by that over the years. I've always referred to it. So
Cool.
That's a reminder for people too, the Autumn 2018 newsletter.
No worries. Yep. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. When Avril Stanley came out, she gave us her potting mixture, and it was based on that. All right. So we'll put this over here and get this out of the way because we're about to make a mess. All right. So we can finally get stuck into this portrait. So first thing we're going to do, move up there, is let's see if this has got any wire or, okay, ooh, there's slugs on here. I did check for redbacks, there's no redbacks. So the first thing I'm going to do is underneath here, I can see the wires here holding it in. Why you go slug? Just get that ready. Actually, before I do that, set that properly. Now, around the edge here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the edge. I've got just an old butter knife, and I'm going to go around the edge and just separate the soil away from the edge of the pot. Now, with a small, a medium-sized tree like this, the butter knife works really well. With a really big tree, I've got this rather lethal-looking sickle there. That's great for getting in deep, but you don't need that. You can get away with one of these. But that one's good for really big pots. So get around. You may need to go around a couple of times. You go right down. Makes a horrible noise because it's going up against all the gravel and all the grit that's in there. So I want to be able to lift this tree out in one piece. And it's fairly hard to get my knife down in here, which confirms to me that this needs to be done. Let's move that there so we can see a bit better. All right. Now, the other good thing about this pot, it's got nice straight edges, which makes this job really easy. Sometimes some pots have like curved edges, and it's painful. Don't let it stop you from getting a nice pot with nice curved edges. If it suits the tree, they look gorgeous. But it's a bit of a pain when it comes to repotting. You've got to cut through the roots to get through. All right. Let's get close now.
Did a tree like that yesterday, Matt.
Yeah. Yeah, you curse it when you're repotting, but when it's all done, you go, oh, yeah, that's why I chose that pot. It looks really nice. Okay, now, I've got to be a bit careful here lifting this out because this tree has really nice bark on it. I don't want to just kind of grab it because I don't want to dislodge all the bark. So this is actually going to be a little bit tricky. Down it, oh, there we go. It's coming out. Whoa, look at that. All right, that can go down there. Okay, so here we go. You can see it's a big, thick mat of roots here. Yeah, that mesh is really stuck in. I'm going to have to cut that out. That's okay, so I'm going to cut a whole lot of this anyway. So the next tool I need is a chopstick. A wooden chopstick, doesn't have to be a fancy metal one on this. And what I do is I'm going to have to remove most of the soil. Take your time. Usually I will do this outside or on my bench in my shed because it's going to make a bit of a mess. I know that, and so what I'm doing is I'm just loosening the soil across the top. I start from the middle and pull it out, middle out, because that's the direction that I want the roots to go from the base. So go around. If there's any nice pieces of moss, I'm going to put them to one side so I can use that afterwards. There's a lot of weeds here as well, so I won't be reusing the weeds. Yeah, there's a fair bit of creeping oxalis in here. And I don't know what that stuff is, the tiny little grass-like weeds. They look kind of pretty and it's tempting to leave them there, but they've got deep roots and they clog up your drainage real quick.
Matt, I use a fork to do that.
Yeah.
Is that damaging?
Absolutely. See here, there's a fork, which I took out the middle 2 times.
Right.
And you can use that as well. Absolutely. I find that this is it's a little rough. It's great on a bigger tree, and you've got a lot to do. But with a medium-sized tree like this, I usually just use the chopstick. Whatever you got, yeah, old forks are really, really good tool. All right, so I'm going around the edge. I'm hoping you can see what I'm doing here. And as I'm going down, I'm exposing obviously more of the nabari, the roots, where the roots meet the soil. That's the first. All right. All right, now I want to get underneath. Tip the pot up now. That's really, you know what, I'm going to cut through that. Where am I? What I've got scissors, I've got branch cutters, all the things that I use on the branches. I've got, I don't like to use my nice leaf cutters and branch cutters on the soil because it'll take the edge off it real quick because the soil's full of grit and it'll damage your scissors. So what I do is I use the cheap scissors and some old branch cutters. However, not everyone has the luxury of that, obviously, but a pair of secateurs or something. But just be aware that this is a bit rough on your tools. I'm actually going to cut a layer off. There's a big layer of thick roots all the way down. I'm going to cut away the roots around. Oh, I can see some big thick roots in here too. All right, so there's embedded. That's the mesh. There's one over here as well. The sun's just gone behind a cloud, so something's got a bit dark in here, which isn't good timing. Okay, I'm just cutting it out. I'm being quite rough because most of these are going to be removed anyway. All right. It's just a bit more flat now. All right, so once again, back to where I was. I'm going to take away that topsoil. I'm now going to start doing the edges. So that the edges around here start poking in. There's a lot of weeds, and start teasing the soil away. It's quite compacted, so I'm happy that this tree needed repotting now. Okay, and I'm coming up against thicker roots now as I go around. I have to start working around the thicker roots, but just keep removing the soil. If I was at the back, you could also get the hose on this and start washing the soil away, or getting a big bucket of water, putting this in the bucket of water if you wanted to do that way, and start loosening the soil that way as well. I wouldn't do that with a lot of species, but with a deciduous tree, not a problem. Like I said, deciduous trees, you can bare root, which means remove all the soil. Janet Sadie, really
and Matt, excuse me,
yeah.
I've been suggested to put some sea salt in that bucket of water when you do that. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, great idea. Sea salt's a great product. I will be giving sea salt to this tree after it's been repotted. I'll be soaking the whole thing in sea salt. That's a good point. Yeah, soaking in sea salt either before or after is a really good idea. Especially after I've cut it, I've got everything, I've removed all the roots that I wanted. Sea salt is, it's not a fertiliser in its own right. So if you give your plant sea salt, you also need to give the fertiliser. But it's a great stimulant for the roots. It's a great stimulant for the organisms in the soil. It's a terrific product. I know in the National Collection in Canberra, they give sea salt to all the trees every 2 weeks, plus the fertiliser. But after repotting, sea salt is a really, really good idea. If you don't have sea salt, your tree's not going to die, it'll be fine, but I think it's a good product to give the tree the best chance.
Would you wash the roots if you were doing a juniper?
I tend to avoid it. Having said that, with the squamatas, I have, and they've been fine. The squamatas, if you do it at the right time of year, which once again, it's late winter, early spring, around August, you could do it, yes. Not a pine tree, a little bit of a pine tree.
Matt, Matt, a question about the creeping oxalis. What sort of treatment do you use? On last Tuesday night, Andrew said he uses zero. And I'm a bit sort of reserved about putting that around onto a pot, you know. So, how do you handle it?
Yeah, look, if you get to it in time, you can just pull it out with a pair of tweezers. Just sit down and pull them out.
Yeah.
And you've got to pull them out on the roots. However, with a really heavy infestation, if I've let it go and the whole thing is just completely covered, I have used zero as well, and it's fine. You don't use much. If you just got to be really cautious. You can put it into a little container and get a brush and paint it on.
Oh, okay.
Just do it when it's not going to rain. Don't do it sort of late in the day. If you do it like when there's still plenty of sunshine, basically so it dries out.
Yeah. The instructions on the bottle sort of say it's got to have at least 6 hours, so it's virtually something you've got to do first thing in the morning.
Yeah. You don't have to be too fussy, but look, I have used sea salt with no issue, but you've got to be careful. You follow the instructions, you don't get it. If you get it on any foliage, it's not going to kill your tree, but it's going to make it sick. Just wash it off with water quickly and you'll be fine. If it rains quick after you've done it, you'll have to do it again. But I have used a zero on a bad case of creeping oxalis and the trees will be fine.
Okay, thanks.
I think a good tip that Janet Savey does is whenever there's hard rubbish collection, she goes out and she found herself an old ironing board, a metal ironing board, because it's just got mesh, and you can do this when you're repotting. You do it outside over an area where the soil can drop through, and do it on the ironing board. And if you make a mess, the soil just drops down onto the ground, and that's quite good.
Well, one of the things I'm using, Matt, it depends if you want to keep your soil, obviously, but a lot of times if I'm repotting, I might turf that a lot away, and I've got those tip-top bread baskets you can get that are about just under 3 foot square, will fit on the top of an open, large wheelie bin.
Yes.
Might rock around. They actually sit, you open the lid obviously, but you can sit it on the top upside down so you've got the flat surface, and you can put the tree on top of that and then work away with that, and everything just drops straight into the wheelie bin.
Oh, great idea. Give that a try.
You've got to find the bread basket, that's the only thing. So.
Yeah, I saw Phil Eckers, he did a similar thing. He had a little container that sat on top, a little platform that sat on top of his green waste wheelie bin. And the wheelie bin's at a good height too.
Yes, you can stand up and do it, which is I find a lot easier on my back and my knees and everything. So
what I'm doing now is I've done the edges and I'm working my way in towards the centre, and I'm going through and I'm loosening up the soil. As I get closer to the trunk, the soil is getting more compacted. Now the other thing I note is I've got all this stuff on the bottom here, all these roots here, which I could try and tease out, but you know what, I'm just going to cut them off, because it's just a mat of roots on here. There's no soil in here. If I cut a bit off,
Matt, when you know you're going to repot like this, is it best to continue watering so the soil's wet, or should you give it 24, 48 hours and have it drier? What's the easiest way of doing it?
Really good question. Look, it's easier to work with dry soil than it is with wet, I'll be honest. If you can keep it on the dry side, don't let it dry completely, obviously, because your tree's not going to like that, but if you let it dry out a little bit, it's going to be easier. The health of the tree, I don't think it matters too much, just the ease with which you can work. I did keep this one slightly dry, but then last night I was washing off, there was a whole lot of moss on the bottom of this tree that I was washing off, and then by doing that, the whole thing got wet. So I'm not sure you can see what I'm doing here. I'll just kind of move my arm. There we go. I'm just removing this mat, this thick mat of roots. And like I said, I'm not really chopping through much soil, I'm just chopping through the roots. And just getting rid of that thick layer of finely matted roots. And the techniques are different for different trees, depending on what kind of roots they produce. I know that a lot of Australian natives and the cotton bush, the area of Cephalus africanus, just produces a big, thick mass of very fine roots. And the only thing you can do is just cut through it, rather than trying to tease it out. Okay, so almost finished removing this big thick mat. It's around the edges as well. Yeah, this tree definitely needs a repot. It would have survived another year without a repot, but it would have, yeah, the growth would have suffered. It wouldn't have been as healthy. All right, so you can see that's into the bin. All right, so now once again, I'm going to go around the edges now. Again, just work my way around, working my way in. You can see around the edges, it's getting more viable. I'm starting to tease the roots away from the soil. And I'm starting to untangle it. There's some big, thick roots that are going around the edge. There's a big, thick one here, which I'll show in a sec. There we go. That's quite a thick root. You can't see because it's covered in soil. There's some big, thick roots in there. A lot of those ones I'm going to be getting rid of. Pruning roots is similar to pruning branches in that by continually pruning, you produce ramification, and that's what you want. What you don't want, the big thick roots have a poor surface area to volume ratio, which means there's less surface area for the same amount of space. The little fine roots are the ones that do all the work. They're the ones that pull up the nutrients and the water. Finer roots are more efficient. And that's the reason we can get a tree to fit into a little pot, is by doing this continuously, by taking out the large roots, cutting it back. It encourages small, fine feeder roots, and you can get a huge surface area of roots in a small pot, which is how they survive. So that's the other reason we do this, which I didn't mention before. We want to encourage ramification in the roots. Well, okay. So the soil towards the middle is getting quite tough. I'm hitting the larger roots now. This is where I prefer to use the chopstick rather than the fork, because I can feel my way around now. I'm getting a little bit closer. At the back here, the back of the tree, there's some really big thick roots. Some really great surface roots, which look really nice. So I don't want to chop them off. So you can see, just starting to tease more and more of these roots. The finer roots, some of them are sort of falling off as I'm doing this. That's fine because a lot of them are going to be cut off anyway. There's some big thick roots getting right to the edge of the pot, which I don't want. I'll be taking them back as well. So, I'm going to it's going to take a little while. It's going to take another 10, 15 minutes, I reckon. So keep the questions coming.
You may have mentioned it, Matt. How long has that been in that pot?
Oh, good question. I have to look. I reckon 3 years. I reckon it's taken 3 years. I tend to, when I repot, it's good to write it down so you remember how long ago it was that you repotted. That's really useful. Having said that, I don't tend to repot by calendar. I tend to repot by looking at the tree and seeing if it needs a repot. But it's handy to know when it was done. Especially if you're going to sell a tree. Getting a tree ready for sale at our annual exhibition, it's good to know when it was last repotted so you can write that information. Put it on a little tag on the pot so people, when they buy a tree, especially if it's a mature one, that they know when it was last repotted and if it needs redoing. Okay. This is okay. Now, it's getting really tough here. Right near the front of the tree, some big thick roots which we're going to remove. Okay, I'm going to show you. Use the stabbing motion near the edge and just kind of pushes the soil out. Because what I want to do is remove all the air pockets, especially in close. Now I want to show you, I'm not sure if you can see it. Yeah, it's a bit hard to pick up here. You can see all these nice roots coming down here. There's a big thick one that comes down here, across here, and all the way down to the front. There you can see that one there. That's way too long. I want to cut that by about half. There's some other side shoots, side roots coming up from the side. I'm going to cut that right back. That'll encourage finer roots. My scissors probably won't do the job, so I've got a pair of branch cutters and cut that off. And then so just cut off this rather large root. Now, a big thick root like this, I'm not sure if you can see that, make a good cutting. I'm going to put that to one side because if I plant this in a pot, it'll grow, it can end up with a little shogun with an interesting trunk. Janet Sadie got me onto that with these guys. I was at my very first workshop many years ago. She was doing what I'm doing now, hacking this big tree, and she was cutting off the roots like I'm doing now, and she was handing them to me, here you go, they'll make a good cutting. And there's another one there, quite thick root. I plant them up and they make beautiful little shogun sized small trees.
So ashes will grow from root cuttings?
It wasn't ash, sorry, it was an elm tree. Did I say ash? I haven't tried it with an ash. So I meant, if I said ash, I meant... Oh,
no, sorry. I thought you were actually working on an ash because that's what you said last week.
Yes, no, this is Chinese.
Yeah, I missed the beginning, so that's on me.
Yeah, what happened was, I had originally planned to, work on an ash tree, but then when I was out the other day, this one is budding. I thought, okay, I've got to do this one. Now, my ash trees can wait for a little bit longer because they're not doing anything, but this one's starting to bud. Okay, now I've got some other big, thick roots coming out from here. I'm just going to cut them off real close. Once again, there's a nice root there on that, which I can use for a cutting. Not that I need more trees, but you just got to keep propagating. All right, towards the back here is particularly problematic. There's some very large, thick roots coming down here. I'm not sure if you can see that because it's all very dark. You'll see the finished product. Cutting off some of these big, thick roots, which are very close to the edge of the pot. And a lot of the roots, the big, thick ones, they get to the edge, they go down the edge, and then they go back under again, and they curl around underneath. So I'm removing all of those. I really should have worn an apron or something, because I usually do, I forgot. Once again, great big thick roots near the edge, taking these off. And you got to remember, you can work on the branches of a tree almost all year round. You know, you can work on it and tweak it and that, but you only get to work on the roots when you do a repotting. So if you're doing a repot, you've got to take advantage of the situation and work on the roots. And what I mean is, on the nabari, where the roots come away from the trunk, tidy it up, remove the big ugly ones, encourage the ramification, and I'll stick on that. Arrange the roots around the base of the tree to make it look nice. All right, that's a good one. I've got lots of root cuttings from this one. At the next exhibition, we'll see lots of small elm trees in pots from me. Okay, now we're getting quite close to the trunk now. I'm still going around. Now, the other thing which I wanted to do for a while, I'm not sure if you can see it, there is a root, yeah, there it is, this one here. I've left it there for a while. It starts too high up the trunk. I like all the roots to come out at the same level at the base of the trunk. This one's up too high. It's got this kind of aerial look to it, which I don't like. And I've been wanting to remove it for a while. So I'm going to remove it. So what I'm actually going to do is pry it free underneath. And then finally, I'll get to cut that off. There it goes. All right. Once again, that's a great candidate for a little shogun. So what I normally do is I just plant them in some potting mix or something, so a bit more fresh grain in the potting mix, perhaps not all bonsai mix, and I just bury them fairly deep, so it's just the top of it sticking up, and just let it go for a year or two. And then after a year or two, the whole pot will be full of roots. I then take it out and give it a basic style. So there's another big thick one there, that's all right. Now underneath that root that I just cut off, there's some small ones coming out to replace it, so that's good. I'm going around.
Matthew,
if
you had wanted that root to try and thicken up the base of the tree, could you have tied it back against the branch and would it eventually grow to it?
Yep. I don't think it would fuse. Chinese elms fuse very well. A trident maple definitely would. Trident maples fuse really well. You could, strap it in, tie it up with something.
Yeah.
I'd be worried about damaging the bark on this tree.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I haven't done this a bit underneath yet. I'm using a root hook, which once again you can get from the bonsai shops. Bonsai Mujo sells them. I think Barry on Anzac Highway sells them as well. You don't need them, but they make the job a little bit easier.
We sell them.
Oh yeah, of course, the club sells them. Yeah, of course. These are useful for, especially for bigger jobs. They're not for doing delicate work, as you can see. As I get closer to the base, start using the chopstick again. And what I really, this is a really important bit, I need to loosen all this soil underneath here. If it's not removed, it needs to at least be loosened so that the water can get down. It's really compact, and I've noticed directly in the very centre, there's a little dry bit. Everything else is actually quite good. I'm pleased with that, but there's a tiny little dry bit where the water doesn't get because it's gotten quite compacted. Now, the other thing I can see some big, thick roots coming from underneath there. Crikey, I'm making a mess here. I'm going to remove those. Removing these thick roots.
Now, is it my imagination, where you've got your hand holding the trunk at the moment, is there a bit of reverse taper there?
A little bit, yeah. But if you get the tree on the right angle, you don't notice it. At the moment, it's a bit hard to tell because it's covered in moss and it's all dark and it's a bit hard to tell. But yes, if you get it from the wrong angle, there is a bit of reverse taper. Mostly because the bark on this thickens up, nice corky bark on this one. But down the bottom here, there was a lot of moss and algae. And I had to sort of brush it off a bit, and a lot of the little flaky bits came off. So that adds to the reverse taper. I'm not too concerned about it. All right. The other thing I want to do is directly underneath the trunk, if there's any roots here coming straight down, I want to remove them. Roots coming straight under from the base. I want to only have roots coming from the nabari, from the edge, flaring out. They're the only roots I want. One's coming straight down from underneath, I want to get rid of. By just having roots coming out from the side, helps produce that flare that we want. As these thicken up, it induces flare into the base of the trunk. Roots going straight down, don't do that. So we always want to get rid of roots coming straight down underneath the base of the trunk. Okay. And yeah, there's a lot of soil under here with no roots in it, because the water doesn't tend to get directly underneath the trunk as much, although it is still, there's still moisture there, which is good. All right, I'm just coming up, there's some big roots coming out from underneath. Definitely need to get rid of those. You can imagine a really big tree will take you like an hour or so at least. A little shogun tree takes about half an hour. Okay. Wherever I'm finding roots about pencil thickness, I'm just taking them off.
Matt, can I ask admin to mute themselves because they keep coming up on the screen?
Okay, who's that? Somebody I can...
admin.
Hang on a sec. I'll get fingerprints all over the screen. Bear with me. All right, everyone is muted except me now. Okay, so I'm getting closer and closer to the middle here. There are some sections, it's hard to see. I've got thick branches coming out. There's gaps between those big roots. I can get my chopstick down into, and I'm pushing the old soil out. Because this is the bit right up against the trunk that tends to get compacted the most, and water won't get in. So I'm getting right in there and pushing that soil through and combing it out, so pulling it away from the trunk. I'm doing that right up close to the trunk. There's some soil right up and underneath. And I'm going to do this up against all of these roots. So I'm now exposing the surface roots because I'm pulling the soil away up against the trunk now. I'm trying to do this where you can see it. I appreciate the light's not great. Okay, there's some big thick roots under here. The other reason I need to get rid of some of these big thick ones is that it's going to stop the tree from sitting down nice and low. Because remember, I'm putting this into quite a shallow pot. So all those roots going straight down from all over the place, they're just pushing the tree out so high. Okay. Now, at this stage, if I was outside, I'd get the hose on this and I'll wash all this off. And so you can see the roots very, very clearly. There's lots and lots of, a lot of these are big, thick roots close. Yeah, I'm knocking off a bit of the bark on them, unfortunately, but I'm trying to be as gentle as I can, although it doesn't look like I'm being gentle. I'm just going combing the roots away from the trunk. You want them to radiate out away from the centre. Okay, let's go all the way around now. A couple of big sections here. All right, we're getting close now. And the other thing I'm going to do is now look at this surface Navari and see if I can improve it. So what you can do, if there's any roots that cross over, now's the time to sort that out. You can either cut bits off or you can space them apart with toothpicks or bits of bamboo or something and get them looking good, get them looking neat. Get rid of those crossing roots, getting rid of the ones that are coming out at the wrong angle, and really, really tidy it up. Like I said, this is your only chance to do it. Okay, getting underneath here now. It's a bit hard to see in this light. And I'll tip this up in a minute and show you. Once again, lots of roots coming down from underneath the trunk. Big one there. Where's that coming from? Oh, yeah, a lot of root cuttings. This is really good. So this is a corky bark, as you can probably see from the corky bark. It was given to me many years ago from somebody who decided they didn't want to bonsai anymore. So I was pretty happy to take it off their hands. It wasn't very big at the time. So I had it just in a grow pot, just a large pot for me for quite a few years, just to thicken it up. And it responded really nicely. Okay, big thick roots coming out from underneath. I'm not sure if you can see underneath that now, but you can see that I'm going quite hard in here. Keep finding roots that are going thick roots. Like I said, I'm trying to keep, basically we're encouraging more of these finer roots. Okay. I'll keep that one. All right. So I'm hoping you're looking at this going, wow, that's going quite hard. And encourage you to do the same. If you saw Neil Padbury doing his talk a few weeks ago about the trident maples, you would have seen how hard he goes on trident maples. He goes right, he trims right around it, so there's only the tiniest little couple of centimetres of fine roots coming out, and that's it. And he plants it back and they shoot off again. So these aren't quite as robust as a trident maple, but they're pretty close. All right, we're going to have a look in a minute and see how this looks in the pot. More thick roots. I just keep finding thick roots coming from underneath. You can see that where I've been cutting off the big roots here. And there's still quite a bit of soil directly underneath. All right, another thick one there. I've got to remember there's the canopy of the tree. I'm trying not to damage. All right. Really, really, really big trees are a two-person job. All right. Now we're getting down to nitty-gritty. See a few big roots under here. Just keep cutting back hard. Get my fingers out of the way. I'm untangling. There's quite a few roots twisting and turning and tangling each other. I'm hoping this is making sense what I'm doing. All right. Now, actually, I can recycle the soil too. I put it in a bucket and I put it into a sieve or something and I'll wash it. I'll wash away the soil and I'll end up back with the grit, with the inorganic material. Okay. All right. So, not sure if you can see, that's quite a bit smaller than it was. So I've got a nice lot of roots around here. There's a couple which are crossing over. I'm just going to cut that off. If there is a thin root that you want to encourage, don't cut it back. Same as when you're doing the branches, if you let it grow long, it'll thicken up. So the thick stubby, the thick roots, I'm cutting back hard, and you probably can't see it. In here there's an area where there's lots of smaller roots coming out, which I want to encourage, so I'm not cutting them at all. Okay? So, I think that's about ready. Let's have a look and see how it looks in a pot. We'll try the blue one first. Also, this will give us a chance to see if I need to cut back the roots any harder. Oh yeah, I'm going to put this in, I have to cut this back quite a bit harder. I think that's too small. It's nice. I think this pot just needs to be a little bit bigger. Okay. Alright, so I'm just going to shut this door because there's some noise out there. Just bear with me. Alright. Certainly with this cream pot, it fits a lot better. I'd be a bit concerned about how many of the surface roots I would have to remove in order to get it into the pot. So right now I'm leaning towards this one. If I pop that down like that, I think that's looking pretty good. Yeah, that's looking quite nice. All right, so I just need to, let's have a look. That root there, that root there. No, that's looking okay. I don't need to chop off any more of the big roots to get that looking good. Now, the next step is the positioning of the tree. Once again, you get one crack at this per repot. And if you get it slightly wrong, like I do sometimes, it annoys you for years. So, two things I need to get right. Firstly, the angle of this trunk in relation to where the pot is. So I want to get that right. So it's showing off the trunk at its best. The other thing is where the trunk is in the pot, whether it's that side, or towards the back, or towards the front. So once again, a rule of thumb, especially unless it's a formal tree, actually even then, you don't want to have the trunk directly in the centre. You want it slightly towards the back and slightly to one side in the opposite direction of what the tree is going. So in this case, the tree is obviously moving in that direction. So that's the direction of the tree. So I don't want it too close to that edge. I want it actually closer to that edge so that there's a nice negative space here. So not too far. So the centre is about there. I actually want it back slightly. Also, slightly back towards the rear of the pot. You don't want it too close, you want it slightly towards the rear. So, that's about the position. But what I want to do is, I'll get the front of the pot. So that's the front looking towards you now. And I want to twist this around so that that's in the direction that I want. Yeah, probably more like that. The other thing I want to do, actually, which I forgot to do, is okay. So once again, I get a little layer evenly across there. I've still got my drainage layer there. But then what I want to do, this is important, is I make a heap, a little heap like this, directly underneath where the trunk's going to go. Why I'm doing this is I want to remove any air pockets. So I put the trunk over the top of that and I'll twist it backwards and forwards over that little heap. Now I'm going to sort of back to you slightly. Now I'll need a bit more under there, under this side. Okay, just I've got my tree's going to have its back turned to you for a second while I do this. Okay, so it's towards the back, it's towards that side, and I've got the angle of the trunk right. All that way, that way. I could fiddle around like this for hours, but I won't. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So that's the front looking like that. That's the angle that I want. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I've got all these wires sticking up. I'm going to wire this in place. So what I want to do is put the wire, I'm going to weave it through over some of the roots and under some of the other ones. And twist it in place. If it was a really delicate root, then I'm putting the wire over, I'll put a little piece of rubber or something underneath it. That's looking fine. Then I've got the two at the back. Okay. Just wire that in place. So, okay, that's really secure now. That's not moving it around at all. I will get, sorry, just where are we? Tighten it up a little bit, not too tight. And once again, this is my last chance to get these roots exactly where I want them. So just tightening this wire up a little bit. I'll cut that off. Okay, now I've got somewhere here, some more toothpicks and things. Bear with me. You can use a little piece of wire. Where are we? There. We've got these out before. Paddle pop sticks, just anything kind of temporary. It's a paddle pop stick. There we go. These little, it's like toothpicks, like a little fork. What I'm doing, you're not going to be able to see this very well, but some of these roots just need to be spread out a little bit. I'm just seeing a root here that's crossing over. I'm untangling it, put it down. That's okay. I'm putting just a little fork in there just to hold it in place. It's only temporary, obviously. They'll be able to come out. So I'm just setting the roots exactly where I want them so that they look good. That one there's too long. That one can go down. So I'm going around just making sure there's no crossing roots, nothing that looks out of place. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay. Just make sure, last chance. Yep, I'm good to go. Right. Oops. Right, got my chopstick back, got my scoop. What I'm going to do now is start pouring the soil over the roots here. Working with dry potting mix is much, much easier because it falls in between the cracks. Really nice. If I'm working with wet potting mix, it's much harder. Not impossible. Don't beat yourself up over it, but it's hard. Okay, this is the important bit. I get my chopstick and I push it into the gaps. That's what I'm doing here. What I want to do is remove all of the air pockets. I want to fill all the air pockets up with soil. Okay, air pockets, what will happen if there's an air pocket in here, the roots around that air pocket will just die. It may not kill the tree, but it's a waste of space. You have an area in your pot, you don't have a lot of room in here, there'll be an area in your pot that nothing can grow in. It's just a waste. So you want to remove all the air pockets. I'm really pleased because I've been able to, I've exposed all the roots. So the roots on this now look 100% better than what they did before. So I can see them properly and makes the tree look much older and more powerful. I'm really happy with the way that's looking. So I'm going around, so I've got to go around the edges, and then also between the gaps in the roots here, there's a big air pocket right there. I need to fill that in. Any questions while I do this bit? You're all on mute. If you've got a question, you'll need to unmute yourself. So just remember.
I guess it's not a question, Matt. It's a comment. It's been fantastic to watch you work slowly and deliberately. And in all the years I've been in the club, I've never actually seen the whole process being done by someone else. And it's amazing what I've picked up that I really haven't practiced myself. So it's been fantastic.
Okay, thanks. That's good feedback. Well, at a club meeting, it's harder to do because you got less time. We've often got less time, and you don't have the camera in a little bit close. You're a little bit further away from the action. I've done these sometimes at a workshop, but at a workshop you've got even less time. But yeah, no, thank you. That's good. We should do these more often. I've got a lot of repotting coming up. Got a lot of different species. I've got an ash tree coming up soon. It'd be worth watching when I do a juniper and a pine tree because they're a little bit different. You can't go as hard. But this is a good introduction one. Deciduous. I really enjoy repotting deciduous trees because they respond really well. You don't have to be too delicate, as you've noticed. And I didn't have to remove too many of the roots here. Sorry, I didn't have to rearrange them too much because I've been doing this so many times on this tree. And obviously, the big major roots I placed where I wanted them a long time ago. And so I don't have to redo that again. When you've got a young tree that perhaps you're repotting for the first tree, it could be a stock tree that's still growing in a plastic pot. When you repot it, you will probably have to go a little bit harder because you will have to get every single root placing where you want it in that nice radial fashion. You need to do that. If you don't do it from the beginning, your tree will always suffer. I notice a lot of the pine trees that have been for sale at the initially at Bonsai Mojo, not the ones now, but the initial ones. It was fairly obvious that work hadn't been done on the labari early on, and they produced this big kind of cowpat. It looks like a cowpat, and it hasn't, and crossing roots and not very well done. However, the ones I've done now I've noticed that are a lot better. So you need to, if you've got a tree that's in its early stages and you're repotting, sort out the roots, get it looking good now, and you won't have to do a major operation later down the track and set the tree back. You do it early when it's young, they'll respond. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm going around, filling in all the little gaps. You don't want to push it in so hard that it becomes impossible to push. Yes, Rue?
Sorry to interrupt, sir.
Yes.
But Maisie's watching Mother and she's turned the volume up so loud that I can hear it from the study.
All right, can you get it to turn it down a little bit? I'll be there. Okay, all right. So, sorry, there's a crisis on the in the telly room. All right, so I've filled it up with soil. Now, another important thing to do is the soil around here is obviously goes all the way to the edges. When I get to the edge here, I don't want the soil, the surface soil right up against the top of the lip. I just want a little gap in here. The reason I want that is if I don't, it's hard to explain it. So there's the, if that's the edge of the pot, I don't want the soil level up too high. I just want it down slightly. So there's a little lip here. So when you water, the water rushes down, hits that lip, it goes down instead of over the edge of the lip. I hope that makes sense. It's all right, we'll talk about that recently. And it occurred to me that I've hardly ever seen anyone talk about that, and actually it's fairly important. But you want a little, just a little dip in the soil, like a little trench, like a little divot. I'm not sure how you describe it, just around the edge here. So when the water, you water it, excess water runs down, and it hits that lip and it goes down. It doesn't go over the top of it. I hope that makes sense. All right, so one more thing to do. So that's all looking, I'm really pleased with the way that looks. It's sitting lower in the pot. The pot looks better. One last look, because this is my last chance. Does it need to go that way a bit? No, I think that's good. The other thing I do is I put a layer of something over the top of it. There's quite a few fine roots near the surface here. I just want to protect them a bit. Also, this potting mix is great. It doesn't look particularly attractive. So what I did, if you remember, when was it, a couple of weeks, was it last week, we talked about moss, and I made up a mixture. I got some sphagnum moss, I put it through a sieve, got it nice and fine, and I mixed in some moss, which I found growing around the place, crumbled it up, put it over the top, and I've got this nice mixture here. I'll get a bit closer so you can see it. Like that. Okay, so I've got some that left over. I'm going to sprinkle that over the top here. It may wash away, and that's okay. It'll protect those roots a bit better, and then, with any luck, the moss will grow as well, and I'll get a nice covering of moss. So I haven't been doing this for very long, this top layer. With a tree that's like this, that's looking really nice, and was, you know, I'd be happy to show this. Yeah, go that extra step. If this was just going back into a plastic pot for another couple of years, I wouldn't bother. I've got a tree that you want to look nice this spring with a bit of moss. So I'm just going around and sprinkling this moss over the top here, make it look a bit nicer. And then what I need to do fairly soon is take this outside, water it, give it a really thorough watering. I'll put the hose on it with the rose attachment, water it many times and flush out, because there'll be a bit of dust in here, in the soil mix, and wash out all that dust. And you'll notice when you first water it, the water that comes out will be fairly cloudy. You just keep doing that, do it multiple times, maybe a couple of times over the course of the day, until it runs clear. Once it's like that, once it's done that, I'll then give it a good dose of sea salt. I'll either pour it over the top or just drop it into a bucket of sea salt, let it soak for a couple of minutes, take it out again, and it'll be good to go. I will then put this in. Look, I don't really need to put it in a sheltered position right now because the weather is so mild. A little bit of sun will be fine. Although most of my deciduous trees at the moment are in a shady spot of the garden because that doesn't need sun. So I'll put this somewhere where it's not going to be in the wind. I just want to keep it away from the wind. The wind will dry it out a bit. And then as the weather warms up, the roots will take off, more shoots will come out and respond pretty well. It's important not to overwater it. You need to let the soil not dry out, but get a little bit drier than it after the water. That'll encourage the roots to go out seeking more water, but don't mean letting it get bone dry, but just don't keep it sopping wet. 2 weekly applications of sea salt will be good. And I'm not going to fertilise it. It's not going to need fertilising for a while. Like I've said before, that first flush of spring growth, I don't want it to be rampant, strong growth. I want it to be subdued. So I'm not going to fertilise it then. Once that first flush of growth hardens off, that'll probably be around, I don't know, October, maybe actually even before then. Once that's hardened off, then I'll start giving it some fertiliser. Okay. All right. So that's the tree in its new pot. It's really stable, and I'm really happy with that. It's not wobbling about. That tree is going to look, it looks better in its new pot. And the barry looks better. I've sorted out a few crossing roots. I've got rid of this aerial root, which I didn't like. So I'm really happy with the way that tree is looking. So we've been going for quite a while. Are there any questions? Feel free to ask a question about this tree or anything bonsai-wise. Doesn't sound like it. So what I'll do is, well, I've got to find something to put in this pot because it's gone through all this trouble. I'm not sure yet. So I'm going to go and water this tree. I'm going to pot up all of these root cuttings. So keep your eye open for them at the next exhibition. I'll have lots of root cuttings sprouting for sale. So I think that's it for this week. Next week we'll get Luke to do next week, so I'm not sure what he's going to do. And then it's either the week after or the week after that on the Saturday morning, then we'll Andrew Edge as well. We'll put out an email about that. And we'll send out an email soon about the possibility of when we're going to have our next meeting and what we decide. So we're having committees having a meeting on Tuesday night, and so we'll have a decision about our next meeting, which will hopefully be the first Tuesday in August. So unless there's any questions, I'll sign off.
Thanks, Matt. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Matt. Very instructive.
No worries.
Thank you very much indeed.
That's great. Thank you.
No problem at all. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.